What does one do when faced with incredible odds from Mother Nature? When your idyllic paradise is forced into a time pressured remodel of the grounds, you start one step at a time. This is how we get down when the skies muck it up. We had just settled into the new space and everything felt quite pleasant. Perfect, even. We loved it here. It was warm but not hot, cool but not cold. The hay was affordable and abundant, the ground was dry, the pastures were beautiful, the dogs were enjoying themselves. We were just settling into a really nice routine, and then the skies opened up. We were faced with back-to-back Atlantic storms, not once, but twice. Atlantic storms where it rained sideways for 2 weeks. Flooded the lower portion of our brand new farm, almost coming halfway up to the house. I was working full time, I had no help, and I was alone on the farm while my partner was traveling. The farm flooded, and half of my paddock track paradise system was inaccessible and unsafe for the horses. It was kind of fun on some level to kind of see everything that was there. Our spirits were good, but we needed help. We needed a lot of help. I reached out to my neighbors, and thankfully, within days, help arrived. And here are my two delightful neighbors checking the road drain that had clogged. But then, sadly, one of my other neighbors who owned the small forest right on the other side of our fence decided to sell the pine tree forest that was there on the corner. So suddenly we lost all of our privacy and all of the drainage that these pine trees on the corner were offering to the farm. Thankfully, they left the oak trees that were on the corner, but not only was our farm flooded, but now we were losing one of the aspects that was helping keep the water at bay. So I had to call the mayor, and the mayor sent a team of diggers to help restore the municipal drainage on the road outside our farm. And thank God they did, because this really, really helped. We were grateful to have the help of the mayor and the municipality who stepped in to help clear it for us. If we hadn't had this done, if those drains hadn't been cleared, we might still be underwater. We were able to get the flow into the drainage system on part of the farm, but not all of it. But the most important piece to the puzzle arrived. Mud grids. I had been coveting mud grids as a horse person since I saw them on the market. I'd always dreamed of having some. When the opportunity presented itself to have mud grids on my farm, I jumped at it. They fit together so easily. As you can see, even in deep boot-sucking mud, it takes one or two people a few moments to essentially pontoon that mud underneath a clean, clear, gently non-slip surface. For some horses this would be slippery, for mine it's not, but my dog certainly approved of it too, and it basically gave us our farm back. We even fed on them sometimes. The hooves approved of it because we were able to help the hooves have dry and hard standing. Immediately, no groundworks required, no big machines and no excavators required. This also helps control the water level because it helps improve drainage that is underneath. As you can see, the water table had came right up over the top of the topsoil, and this helped us basically float the farm through the winter. I think they look beautiful. Some people think they look ugly, but I would so much rather look at a pontoon of mud grids than look at a big quagmire of mud. This only took a day or two of work to lock them all together. They are easy to take apart and you can move them at any time. You just slot them in and away you go. You can move them around. If you don't have the budget to put lots of them in permanently, you can create pontoons in high traffic areas or in eating areas that help you and your horses get mobile again during wet weather. I'm so grateful to Horses Home INB for partnering with me to create a mud-free farm in what is one of the wettest regions of Europe, northwest Spain. This trench here is to help access some drainage as well, so water can flow gently downstream or gently downhill away from the farm. But also in the summertime, it's important to have some space between the pontoons because they expand in the heat. Aren't they amazing? I mean, this is some of the wettest weather I've ever experienced in my life. It has been raining sideways for weeks, and my horses are able to move, live, play, and eat happily with these all in place. Everyone's getting back to their playful selves, thankfully, due to the mud grids. And as the season shifted out of a very wet autumn or fall and into winter, it became even more important to prepare for the next phase of change. We started to plant water-loving plants along our fence lines. We started to plant even more mud grids into the ground to give our horses the ability to stay moving and stay out of the mud regardless of the weather. We began laying down gravel to complement the mud grids. This was also really important to winterize the entire farm. So here we had some gravel arriving and we tipped it on top of a non-woven geotextile to stop the gravel intermixing with the mud underneath. This allows water to pass through the membrane, but the gravel doesn't pass into the mud and the mud doesn't lift up into the gravel. This enables us to stabilize the topsoil, create a gravel reservoir which allows the water to fall down back into the water table below, and it gives us firm or even hard and dry standing to live with during the wettest of the wet seasons. Doing this in winter is not something that I recommend because the truck there was getting one pass on our wet pasture, but after 2 or 3 passes, it's not going to go well. So here is a 30-ton truck about to drive over the Horses Home INB mud grids. 30-ton truck. That's on its way out. By the way, it already drove in fully loaded with 10 tons. I'm just going to let that speak for itself. The engineering of these grids is so impressive. Look at that. A gravel truck drives straight over it and they don't break. They don't break, guys. A fully loaded gravel truck in wettest wet mud drives straight over the grids and it didn't break. The gravel is important because it improves the grids even more. So the grids act as a base underneath the gravel and it makes the product completely non-slip because in the summertime the grids can be a little bit slippery when they heat up and warm up. So putting gravel on top of the grids makes these grids not just a winter aspect to my farm, but a summer and spring aspect too, because it prevents unwanted or noxious weeds growing up through the grids for the horses to eat, and it creates dry, well-drained, hard-standing all year for my horses. I wish I had installed this in the summertime, but we didn't have time. We only had time to do this once we already had a problem. So, as you can see, after a few passes, the gravel truck got completely bogged in my field, down to the axle, and we had to call our neighbors with tractors to pull it out. So here you can see the difference between the grids, the gravel, and the grids with gravel. And you can see how the finished product is finally starting to come together. I have firm, hard standing in what should be basically an enormous mud pit. My horses are able to walk in and out of their shelters. They're able to keep their feet dry. They're able to move around and not slip. So as spring awakens on the farm, we started to find ourselves looking at little aspects of drier weather on the farm. Aspects of drier weather. The rain still challenged us. Half the farm was still closed from all the mud, but we were able to reinstate some aspects of the farm which were more functional and healthy for us and for our horses. My horses were even running on the mud grids, which I do not recommend.
Sunny's next. Caleb, you're all going. Careful! Fucking hell! Jesus Christ!
My horses noticed that this was a mildly slippery surface and self-regulated that. We have since put gravel on all of the grids around the house to ensure that if they were to run, that it's completely non-slip. But as you can see, we just had trotting and cantering on the grids so that they were okay.
So what does the farm look like now at the beginning of spring and at the end of winter? Here in Atlantic Northwest Spain, we kind of get two seasons. We get a wet season and we get a dry season. And we just turned the corner into dry season about 10 days ago. So as you can see, this is the higher part of the farm and everything's kind of dried out, but the water table is still close to the surface. If I dug a little bit deeper into the soil, it's still quite moist. And as this mud has dried, as you can see by the color differential, it has laid a perfect thin layer of dirt on top of the mud grids, which makes them non-slip in the dry season, which saves me I don't know how much money in a gravel truck. So let's have a look at the grid in a little bit more detail. It's got kind of two layers to it. There's the grid function below and then the surface function on the top. These holes are completely transparent. There's nothing there. And so the mud can come up and through, but also the water can go down and through. And these act like little wells which help push the water down into the water table below the topsoil. The actual rubber itself is completely recycled. It's from recycled ingredients, and there's like bubbly mesh. It's like got air bubbles inside, so these actually float in water. So you can see here in this part of the farm, there was no mud grids here. The horses walked here and water collected here. As you can see, this is completely degraded ground. And if I allowed my whole farm to go this way, I would have an absolute disaster for horse keeping on my hands. Over here, you can see what the ground looks like with the mud grids. So it doesn't matter if it's dry like it is now in spring and in summer, or if it's wet, raining sideways in winter, this is going to be a comfortable surface for the horses to live on, and for me and for my team to work on and care for the horses properly. It's also super easy to muck out because you just sweep it up and it goes straight out. The mud grids come from this company. So if you're living in Germany, if you're living in France, in Spain, in fact, anywhere on the continent EU, unfortunately not the UK. The UK has their own supplier now. But if you're living in the continent EU, this is the supplier to get your mud grids from. They're called Horses Home INB Systems. If you live overseas in North America, Australia, these mud grids are the same design everywhere. You just need to find your local supplier that has them in your country. But if you're working and living with horses on the continent of EU, you can get them from Horses Home, and I have a discount code available. If you use Lockie10, you can get 10% off your order anywhere on the continent EU. Do you want to see what the rest of the gravelly areas look like? Come with me. Later in this year, we're going to have some landscapers come in. They're going to survey the land, and we're going to install drainage ponds, water-loving plants, and a proper track that will open up the whole farm all of the year. So this is kind of half of a farm tour, but a proper farm tour is going to come later, where I will show you all the fences, I'll show you the shelters properly and all the things that we're putting in and the way we're putting it in here.
So the sun sets on this adventure. Winterizing a farm during the winter, I do not recommend. I recommend we be more prepared until the next push from nature.